showed up today and for those of you who are able to pick up your grow bags. As Gabriel said, I am Hannah. I work for Ekar Farm in Denver. It is an urban farm that is inspired by Jewish values. We operate on an acre and a quarter of land in Lowry, Southeast Denver. Everything that we grow is grown for community donation. So we work with the Jewish Family Service Weinberg Food Pantry, Kavod, and Same Cafe. And then we also do some CSAs for families who are receiving WIC and SNAP benefits. So last year we grew about 20,000 pounds of food for all of our sites, and we hope to grow about the same amount this year. We also offer a lot of programming for families and kids and adults, basically a whole spectrum of programming on the farm, both for Jewish and non-Jewish participants. And our programming is all earth-based and how to get people engaged with growing food and taking care of the earth and doing so in a joyful way. So thank you all for joining today. I wanted to start out with a little bit of a slide. So as a Jewish inspired farm, a lot of the work that we do is in communication with and collaboration with our understandings of various Jewish texts and holidays and the agricultural Jewish calendar, which a lot of our holidays are based on. And so I wanted to share this quote, which is one that we often think about and discuss. And I just wanted to use it as an opportunity for us to connect and maybe reflect on what it means. We don't have capacity for breakout rooms, so I'm going to share the slide with the quote and then ask that people put their reflections in the chat, and then I can also open it up to a couple of out loud reflections, one or two, but I know that we have a lot to cover today and there are a lot of good gardening questions, so I want to keep this section brief. So I'm going to share the screen now and read the quote out loud, and then welcome any in chat reflections about what this quote would mean to you, and then if a couple of people want to speak out loud about what it means, that would be great. So the quote says, Rabbi Hezekiah and Rabbi Cohen, in the name of Rav, said, "It is forbidden to live in a city which has no healer, no bathhouse, and no court, which administers lashes and prison sentences." Rabbi Yossi said, in the name of Rabbi Bon, "It is even forbidden to live in a city which has no vegetable garden." So this is a quote that we spend a lot of time thinking about at Ekar and what it means and what does it mean to create a vegetable garden in the city. And that's kind of the intention of this session today, and giving out the grow bags is to help everyone create their own vegetable gardens in the urban settings in which we live. So curious if anybody has any reflections or feedback on what this quote means to them. And also, if you want to share while you're doing that, what brought you to the session today and what your interests in wanting to take away, what you'd like to take away.
I have a question. My name is Valerie. Why were they so interested in a court which administered lashes and prison sentence when 9 times out of 10, Jews were the ones that were getting abused?
That's a good question. And I don't know. When we think about it, when we talk about this quote, I think most of the time what we're focusing on is, why is the garden important and what does it have to do? Like, what are the pillars of society? And you know, when I read the quote about the court and the lashes and the prison sentences, I think I kind of skip over that part because I'm like, I don't know if that's what I think a society needs as much as a garden.
What strikes me about my garden, I have a peach tree, and it keeps me connected to the divine, you know, because I don't make the peaches grow, but I do the preparation. And I wrap the peach tree in tarp in April when the snow comes and the blossoms are already out, because without my work, God, what I call God, can't grow peaches. And I need that connection of seeing my faith is really supported by seeing the constancy of the cycles of the seasons, and watching things grow, come back to life is a huge piece of that for me.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And Hannah, and that's what we think about a lot at Ekar too, is just our connection to the cycles of nature and what does it mean to be a steward, and also recognize that like nature does a lot of work without our help. And so how to stay humble and also know that we do provide, you know, like growing a plant from seed does take effort on our part. So like knowing that it takes effort, and then also that it's not, we're not in control of what happens, and yet it is our responsibility to tend to it. And I have a friend who once said something along those lines of like, wow, I was like, I made this grow. And she was like, well, no, like God made this grow, like this grew on its own, but like the work you do supports that. And so I think nature can provide a great reminder of that. And yes, Janice, I think the quote does mean we need laws and we need food to eat. So the city needs both. Yes. And that's something that we think about a lot too, is food is one of the basic things that we all need. And without that, you cannot have a healthy or a just society. And so the work that we do at Ekar is really focused on how do we make sure everyone has enough food to eat. And then we discuss the other things that need to be addressed in society. But for us, hunger and access to food and the poverty that causes a lack of access to food is the basis of what we are growing for, in addition to helping the earth and kind of reconnecting our understanding of Judaism to our understanding of what it is to be, Adam of Adamah, a creature of the earth. Great. And then, yes. So a garden at the house provides food, but also community engagement and understanding and education of where food comes from, the importance of bees for pollination and ultimately life. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, we do that. Just the garden is not just a place for growing food, it's a place for growing community. The number of people who come to the farm and the quality of healing and connection that can come from working on the earth together is one that is a very ingrained part of what it means to be human, and one that we don't always get to engage with in an urban setting. And so having spaces like gardens or even patios or farms like Ekar all offer this opportunity for us to get together and have some awareness of who we are and where we are, and also all of the creatures and beings that contribute to the life that we live, like the pollinators and the insects and the rabbits. And when we have kids out on the farm, just the amount of joy they get from being able to see and identify various creatures and insects that are all working in this ecosystem to provide the food that we eat is really quite incredible. The other day on the farm, we saw a giant red-tailed hawk just sitting. It was, probably the size of my torso, sitting perched on a fence, hunting rabbits, and just the amount of awe that seeing such a beautiful and like ancient creature provides to everyone is something that is quite a magical miracle, and we want to keep tending to it. Well, thank you everyone for these beautiful reflections. And the intention with this webinar today is to focus a little bit on how to make all of this happen that we're talking about. So what does it look like to grow food, and particularly in an urban setting, how can we do it in a way that's accessible and meaningful and allows us to be stewards of a small part of the earth? And so we had the grow bags, which some people may have gotten. I'm sorry if others weren't able to pick them up. These grow bags were provided by an organization that we work with called Big Green, which is another garden-based nonprofit. And they, in an effort to kind of support more growers, had about 5,000 of these bags available for free for community gardeners and people working to like engage the public in growing. So I just want to thank them for this gift. And then the plants also were a community labor of love. So most of those who picked up, you'll be getting a tomato plant and a basil plant, both of which were grown from the City of Denver greenhouse. And they grew for free to a group of garden programs of which we are a part, who said that they would offer them freely to the community. So the condition that we offered them freely was the condition under which they were grown. And they did a beautiful job, and just another example of what community support can do. So can I see, I wonder if we can get in the chat or like a show of hands. I can't quite see everybody, but how many people have some experience gardening? For how many people is this the first time gardening? So if you just want to maybe chat, like type in the chat if you're new to gardening or if you're an experienced gardener, and we'll hopefully provide things that are of interest to a wide range of people. So we've got some people with some experience gardening. Great, and I'll just talk and let's see what happens as the chat unfolds. So the basics that we want to go over when we're planting in containers are actually I do have a screen share for that. Are basically just water, soil, and sun are the foundations of growing, as well as, I would say, your intention. So, what do you want to do with this? Is it for pleasure? Is it for making food? Is it for something to engage? Is it something to take care of a living being? And depending on what you're looking for, it can decide what kinds of plants you want to grow. But understanding what kind of soil, like understanding the conditions of your environment, are pretty important for growing food. If you're going to be growing inside, there are certain things that lend themselves very well for indoor growing. Certain herbs like thyme and oregano and mint, you can grow indoors year round. And then other things that require a little bit more growing space and or pollination are better to plant outside. Like, for example, corn would be pretty difficult to grow inside. It needs a lot of space and it needs a lot of pollinators. But something like a tomato, which is what you received, could grow both inside and outside, depending on the variety and the conditions of your growing space. So sun is something that's an important factor to consider when you're picking out the space for your plants to grow. All vegetables pretty much need between 6 and 8 hours of direct sunlight. And a lot of times we underestimate or we overestimate how much sun a particular spot in our house or outside our house gets. So I would say that a nice first step is to just kind of observe your home surroundings and see how much sun you actually get. And sometimes that can mean looking over the course of a day and checking on a spot and being like, oh, okay, is there actually full sun here for 6 hours? 6 hours is a considerable amount of time. And based on the shapes of houses, the sun always, things pass over. Typically, southern facing is where you'll get the most light in the summer. And so if you have a southern facing spot, that's a good place to start looking as a place to put your plants. You can grow plants like tomatoes indoors, but again, because they need that light, you want to make sure that they're either like on a table or in a window where they can be getting direct sunlight for that long. And if you have outdoor space, these grow bags are great for outdoors. And I would recommend trying to grow your tomatoes and basil. Well, basils you can grow outside, but since it's the summer, I would recommend trying to grow them outside. And you don't need that much space. You can do it on a patio or on your doorstep if you've got enough sun, or in a backyard. And then the other things to check are, or to think about when planting is basic water. So putting it in a place where you can check on it daily and that you'll remember, not in the neglected corner of your house or outside in some area that you never go to and don't plan on going to very often. Tomatoes like a lot of water. Basil can do with a fair amount of water. And so it's a good thing to like research what plants you're planting and get an understanding of how much water they'll need. Certain things need less water, and tomatoes. So this is the tomato plant, and it likes a moist soil. So I would check daily, and a good way to check is by sticking your finger in about an inch down in whatever pot or container you're planting in and checking the moisture. So if it feels moist about an inch down, then you're good. And if it feels dry, that's a good time to add some water. And the level of moisture you want, the rule or metric I use is not very scientific, but kind of the consistency of a good moist chocolate cake is what I look for in my soil moisture levels. So if you squeeze it, it should be able to stay together a little bit, maybe be a little wet, have like 1 or 2 drops that fall out, but not soaking wet. Soaking wet soil will lead to rot and disease, and there will be too much water and the plant won't be able to get the oxygen it needs. Also with things like tomatoes, you want to make sure they're getting enough water, but if you overwater them, once the fruit buds, it can cause the tomatoes to split and or just be kind of not as flavorful. They'd be like oversaturated with water. And then the other piece to think about is the potting soil. So the bags that people received have a nice amount of good, high quality potting soil in it. You don't want to use dirt from your garden because a lot of the dirt in Colorado is not very nutrient rich and very clay filled and just wouldn't make for a successful plant. There's not a lot of organic matter in it, and it would, it's just not a great, your plants won't thrive. So buying potting soil from the store is helpful. And also because it's not, the growing container won't be in ground, it's helpful to add organic fertilizer. So when we plant in ground, we'll, add compost and other things as the seasons go on in order to bring nutrients into the soil that the plant needs. But with the container, since it's not in the ground, you'll have to add the fertilizers that the plants will need. And so I recommend we always use organic on the farm and encourage other people to use organic non-chemical fertilizers. So 2 options that I would recommend are, one is the Neptune's Harvest tomato and veg liquid fertilizer. It is mostly a sea creature based, so it's got kelp and other kind fish, like a fish fertilizer basically. So it's ground up liquid fish pieces. But they provide a lot of the nutrients and minerals that plants really need. And so for that, I would recommend putting like a tablespoon in a gallon of water and using it to water your plants in once every 2 to 3 weeks. And this is helpful for providing the nutrients that tomatoes need. Again, they're pretty, they're kind of a needy type of plant. They produce tomatoes, which are delicious, but they need a lot of minerals and other nutrients in order to grow successful tomatoes. And then the other thing that I recommend is this Dr. Earth homegrown organic tomato vegetable fertilizer, which is a dry, like a powder looking formula. And I would suggest adding a little to your grow bag before you plant, if you can, like a half a cup and mixing it into the top couple inches, or adding it in probably about 2 months after planting, adding like a 1/4 cup and mixing it into the soil around the tomatoes. So one thing I want to share, so these are the grow bags that people got. They are cloth bags. They are permeable, which means that the water is going to be seeping out of them. And because of that, also air will be coming in. And that means that, so normally with like a terracotta container, when the plant hits the side of the container, the roots will start to wrap around it. But because this pot is porous, the roots will dry once they hit the edge of the container, and they will kind of get stunted, which is actually something that you want, because then the plant kind of stops putting its energy into growing roots around and puts its energy into growing roots at the center of the plant. And so you have a more healthy, vibrant plant. And I would say that's one of the key benefits of this kind of grow bag. Another thing is that it's just lighter weight than a terracotta pot, so you can move it around your house. If you want to move it from outdoors to indoors, that's possible. Because it is porous, the bottom is, once you wet it, the bottom it'll just be a wet container. And I recommend putting it on something to add to drainage and keep it from molding on the bottom. And so what I am using right now is just this little like trivet on wheels. And it's also nice because then I can wheel it in and out of my, from inside here to outside if I need to. But you can also just use a brick, like a couple bricks or a little bench or anything that lifts it off of the ground. I've already moistened the soil. So I did that beforehand because I thought it would be a messy process to do in front of you. And so that involved me using my hands and like spraying it and then mixing it and then spraying it and then mixing it a couple of times until it felt like there was a uniform level of moisture in the bag. And then to plant our plants. So this is the tomato. I don't remember what variety it is, but we'll find out. I'm of the school that it's exciting to find out what I've planted. And so you can plant tomatoes pretty deep. All of the little, I don't know if you can see it, but there are like little nodes, little bumps on the side of the tomato plant. And all of those little bumps will grow roots after you plant them. And tomatoes will get pretty tall, maybe, 3 or 4 feet tall. And so you want a good root structure to keep the plant from falling over. And so when planting something like a tomato, you want a bag that you want to make sure there's at least 12 inches of soil, because that is what they'll need for the root structure. So these bags, which are 5-gallon bags, have about that much soil. So it is a good size container for this plant. Although, yeah, you wouldn't want less than this. So 5-gallon bag is kind of the smallest you would want for a full-size tomato plant. So I've also watered these in because when you're taking them out of the container, it's a lot easier to do so and less traumatic to the plant when they're watered. And plant trauma is something to think about. So they've been growing in these little containers in a greenhouse in like very optimal conditions since they were seeds. And when you take them out of this container and then move them to a bigger container and move them outside, that whole process can be shocking to the root system. And if you do it in a way that increases that shock, it can take longer for the plant to produce fruit and can just generally damage its well-being. So I would say that one thing that we did, and that should have been done, I believe, with all the plants that everyone got, is a process called hardening off, which is where you slowly acclimate the plant to being outside over the course of a week. So the first day you put it outside for an hour and then you bring it back in the shade, and then you slowly increase how much time the plant is spending outside and move it towards the sun. So by the end of a week, it has been outside and exposed to all of the elements of your environment and adjusted to it, so that when you do plant it in the ground, it's not totally shocked by what's happening and start to fall apart. So once I've watered it in, I kind of squeeze it out of the container, and you'll notice that the roots at the bottom, this one's not too bad, but they're kind of like, there's a lot of roots at the bottom, and what you want to do is loosen those roots a little bit. So taking your hand, and I'm getting my table very messy, and spreading apart the roots so that when they start to root into your plant pot, they can root in a full way and not get caught up in each other. And then I like to, with my hands, just dig a hole in the pot. If you're just planting a tomato plant in your pot, I would plant it in the center. That should work out fine. And, they'll get big, so they need as much space as possible. If you're planting both the tomato and the basil, you could plant them both a little off center, but not too close to the edge of the pot. And then when you're planting, you want to, like, again, what I said with the tomato, you want to plant it, I would say probably up to here in the soil. You want as much of that stem as covered as possible. Well, not as much of it, but a couple of inches is good because they'll be rooting in that. And then I usually, once I've planted it, I tap down the soil a little bit to just make sure it's nice and snug. And then here's our basil, which I'm going to try and plant in the same pot. They both can get pretty big. So I would say that this container can fit both of them, but it'll be pretty full. I would not put anything else in the container if you're planting these two things. But the reason we're planting them together is because basil and tomatoes are companion plants, which means that they benefit each other mutually when growing in the same space. So the basil helps ward off some of the predatory insects that might go after your tomato plant. And the tomato provides enzymes that actually enhance the flavor of basil. So it's a pretty nice mutual arrangement. And that's a nice thing to look up too when you're planting and trying to do organic planting in your garden, is finding companion plants. Certain plants like alliums, which are like onions and garlic and scallions, can provide pest control and deter certain pests from your garden. And so it's nice to interplant them with other plants that might be attractive to certain insects that you don't want. And so looking up just your basic companion planting can be a really helpful way to boost the vitality of your garden in an organic way and also add to the diversity of plants that you have. So these basil plants were quite root bound. So I opened up that bottom piece, and then I'll be planting it right alongside this tomato in the pot. And once you plant them, so tomatoes will grow pretty tall. And you want to make sure, so it's good to have a stake. You can use a wooden stake or a tomato cage, which you can buy at any garden center. And you'll want to put those around the tomato probably pretty soon. Like when this size is pretty big, but this size or a little bit bigger, you'll want to put some structure in there to keep the tomatoes from falling over, because as they grow taller, and especially as they start to grow fruit, and they're fruit laden, they'll just start to flop over, and it'll be harder to access, and it can be damaging and like difficult on the tomato if they're high up and have to flop over to the ground, and just can damage the stems, and it's harder to pick the fruit when they're kind of a massive, messy bush. Yeah, so those are so this, I'm going to probably put this one outside because I have outdoor space, and it's the tomatoes and the basil like the sun. And then, but because it's on this little wheeled thing, if they're still producing at the end of the year, I can bring them inside and can try and continue growing. Tomatoes and basil, the tomato usually will be ready to harvest between 60 and 80 days after transplanting. So I know people think of tomato as a summer vegetable, but actually late summer, early fall is the ideal time. And because it is Colorado and we can get freezes at random, last year we had a freeze on Labor Day. It's good to just understand the time window of when you'll have fruits and when you may suddenly have a freeze that kills your tomato plant. So for this tomato, probably I would be looking to get a harvest from it sometime in August or like mid to late August, and definitely by September, I should be having some lovely fruits to put in my salad. And then the basil will be growing. I mean, it's already a full-sized, like a decent sized plant, but it will also grow pretty large. And one thing with the basil, I would recommend pinching off the top flowers. As it grows, it'll grow little flowers, but if you pinch them off, then the plant will keep producing the leaves, which are the edible pieces that we like, and not putting its energy into the flower, which is how the plant knows to reproduce. It'll start growing flowers and stop putting as much energy into the leaves. And then it will be attracting insects, which is great, but also not providing very tasty basil for you to eat. And then you can plant other herbs in your grow pot as well if you decide not to plant the tomato and basil, like if you have an outdoor space for it. And then with other herbs, like things that you are perennials that you can pick over and over again, like thyme or oregano or mint, then that can be a great thing to have that you move indoors once it gets cold out and you want fresh herbs in your house year round. So yeah, thyme, basil, mint, parsley, cilantro. You could try rosemary. Rosemary is a little bit bushy and woody, so you might not want to plant it with some of those more tender things. And all of that you can, so it's also good to look up what the water amounts for each of those plants are. Different herbs need a different amounts of water. And so when you're planting them all in one container, you want to make sure that they can tolerate kind of the same range of moisture. Any hints for keeping rabbits and squirrels away from the grow bag? That is, yeah, so the grow bag, I see someone also said rabbits cannot get into raised beds. So that's helpful for the rabbits. Putting them on some kind of raised platform is an easy way to keep rabbits out of your grow bag. But in terms of squirrels, you can try and put chicken wire. You can do like a chicken wire cage. Squirrels are just kind of hard friends to deal with. They're very ambitious and will get into a lot of things. You can try, there's sprays that you can use, like a cayenne pepper spray that you can make at home, or you can use like a wolf urine or fox urine spray, and those apparently help deter squirrels because they're predators. You can get those usually at a nursery or garden center. But otherwise, yeah, either putting them inside, if you have like a screened porch, that would be a great place to put your tomatoes and basil so they can get all of the sun, but they're inaccessible to squirrels. Otherwise, you can try, again, just trying to make some kind of chicken wire cage to put around them, or putting them somewhere that is less accessible to the squirrels, although their squirrels are kind of like little mischievous creatures. O'Toole's should carry a lot of these products. This place that I spend most of my time in terms of getting the fertilizers, O'Toole's, most garden centers should carry some of them. I even know that like some of the generic places like Home Depot will have the Dr. Earth's fertilizer, but you just want to check and make sure that that brand is good, but there are other brands there that are very chemical based. But O'Toole's is a good, City Floral and Nick's Garden Supply are all stores that I've been to a lot. And Nick's has, both City Floral and Nick's have great variety of plant starts that you can use for your garden. So I recommend those two plates. And then, yeah, well, that's some basic questions. It sounds like a lot of people have a fair amount of experience. So I'm happy to open the floor to other questions and maybe some less basic gardening questions if anybody, or troubleshooting on how to grow in whatever kind of space that you have. So feel free to unmute and ask questions if you have any.
How do you,
Thanks. Eloise, go ahead.
how do you prevent basil bolting? My granddaughter wants to know.
Yeah, so as I said before, basil will just start doing that. They bolt pretty easily. They'll start to, so what you should do is, I can't really see in the, but basically as the flowers start to grow, they'll grow from the top in the center of the plant, and you can just pinch them off, like literally just pinch them and check the plant. Once they start growing, just keep checking regularly. And if you see the flower starting to grow, just pinch it off at the center, and the plant will continue growing from the leaves. And that's also as you harvest. Typically I would harvest, once this is a little bigger, I would harvest this top piece. It'll grow bigger, maybe 3 or 4 inches, and then you snip here, and wherever you snip, the plant will start growing like more branches. And so then you'll have more possibilities for basil harvesting, and then also more possibilities for places where it will flower. So just noticing and pinching off any flowers as you see them.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Janice, I see your hand up. Did you want to ask that same question about picking them up, if that would be possible? Or do you have another question?
No, actually, I was going to ask, because there's some questions people wrote down about the grow bag. They were wondering if for the second season, do you need to change the soil in the grow bag, or do you use the same soil and just add fertilizer?
It depends on the plant that you're growing. I would say that probably the safest bet is to change the soil. If you're planting something like a tomato, which is a heavy feeding plant, it'll take a lot of nutrient, and it would probably be best to just have fresh soil. Another reason to change the soil is because of potential diseases. So tomatoes are susceptible to a lot of different diseases. There's early blight and late blight and various viruses that can impact your tomato plant, and those can stay in the soil. So if you're trying to plant the same plant in that bag, then I would recommend changing out the soil to prevent potential disease transfer. Oh, and another weird tip about tomatoes, they're very sensitive to something we called tobacco mosaic virus, which can be transferred from nicotine. And so if you're a smoker and you smoke cigarettes, I would strongly recommend that you thoroughly wash your hands between a cigarette and touching your tomato plant, because it's very easy to transmit this tobacco mosaic virus through nicotine. Or tobacco.
Thanks.
And yes, you can just empty it and use it again next year. The bag itself. I would just empty it out. You can fold it. I would dry it because they can mold. So I would empty it out, dry it in the sun, and then just they fold really small, and you can just store them anywhere. And then I would also, and you could reuse the potting soil. Like if you're going to plant something that doesn't need a lot of nutrient, like lettuce, which is a pretty low, it doesn't require a ton of nutrient to grow. You could potentially reuse that soil. I would just add some fertilizer first and mix it in there before reusing it. And lettuce is also one of the ones that you could grow inside pretty easily. So if you wanted to do like a little greens garden, lettuces or mixed like greens like mustard or baby kale are things that you could grow in this pot pretty easily in your house, and then just snip, like give it a little haircut when you're ready. Keeping cilantro from going to seed is hard. I don't really know how to do it except planting a lot of cilantro in the cool season and harvesting it and preserving it before it gets hot. Cilantro is one of those strange plants that goes really well with like tomato and basils and peppers, but is a cooler season plant. It doesn't really like the heat. So it just goes to seed pretty easily, but the cilantro flowers are pretty and they smell good, and then create the seed of cilantro is also coriander. So if you want to let them flower and harvest some coriander seeds, that can be fun. And then the other thing is you can do succession. So you can plant cilantro in the spring leading into the summer, and then you can also plant it again in late summer for a fall crop when the weather cools down again. And that's I don't know how to keep it from going to seed. I just kind of hope it doesn't.
Hannah, Rebecca also asked, can you use some discarded food / compost, eggshells, coffee grinds?
I would use, you could make a compost, but if you did, I would make it like an actual compost and not just put food scraps in your bag, because they won't break down in the span of time that you'd need for them to provide the nutrients that you need. But if you do have like actual compost that you've been tending, that is broken down organic matter that is is basically looks like soil, then that's probably good to use. And And I've also seen, I worked on a farm once where we did like a little crushed eggshells around the plant because the calcium in the eggshells helped prevent some of the potential diseases that we were trying to ward off. So you could put some eggshells in there. But I would recommend not just putting food scraps directly into the container, but using compost is fine. Oh yes, and Valerie, do not loosen roots of cucumbers. Yeah, so there are different plants that can tolerate different amounts of transplanting. Yeah, so cucumbers and other certain kinds of cucurbits, so cucumbers and squash and things like that, like to be transplanted, but they don't like to be handled as much. Tomatoes can handle a fair amount of handling, and so putting them directly into the ground is helpful. And then there are certain things that really don't like transplanting. So carrots, anything root vegetables, carrots, beets, radishes, it's best to just plant in whatever medium you plan on growing them in rather than doing what we did, which is transplanting. Because the roots get all distorted and they just, because most of their energy is put into making this root, if you try and transplant them, they'll become very unhappy. And then any other questions? Why are the squirrels in your geranium planters? I don't know. Squirrels are kind of a mystery to me. They eat a lot of different things. So it could be that there are, if they're not eating your flowers, which sometimes the squirrels have eaten my flowers, or at my mom's house, she has a groundhog and it just nibbles on, eats all the flat tops off her tulips. And so they do that because they think it's food. Also, they might be scrounging in the ground for something that's in the planter that they want to eat. Yeah, sometimes we've seen, there's ways to there's the little owls that you can get little fake predators like owls or hawks, little plastic versions that you can put places to prevent the squirrels from getting to your stuff. But
I've put red pepper flakes on around the edge and stuff. They don't.
Does it
like
work?
that. I think so. I have to put it rained, so I have to go get some more. But for a while, every day, a squirrel was in there, and I wasn't getting flowers in one of the pots. In the pot that it was in. So I think it worked, but I have to keep on going out putting more.
Okay, yeah, pepper. Yeah, they don't like the spicy things. So sometimes I've seen people make like a pepper spray in a bottle. You could put like cayenne pepper and water basically in a spray bottle and spritz the leaves of your plant or the fruits or whatever you don't want the animals to get. Although one note on that is that tomatoes do not really like their leaves to be sprayed, again, because they are susceptible to diseases. Spraying on the leaves. So if there's like a diseased leaf, if you spray water on the leaves, it'll transfer from the droplets to other leaves and can possibly spread disease. And so with plants like tomatoes and a lot of those hot summer plants like peppers and eggplant, I would recommend that you spray them or you water them at the roots of the plant rather than watering them from above. So if you have a hose or a watering can, the leaves don't particularly need water. Some plants like lettuces enjoy getting sprinkled, but plants like tomatoes and basils and peppers and zucchini and all of that stuff, if you just water them at the roots, it's more water efficient. They get more of the water and there isn't this possibility of disease transfer, or not as much. And yeah, you can just get a dog. That seems like a good solution to the squirrels. It's getting a dog. Maybe a cat. Maybe a cat would work. And here's a question is, why are my transplanted tomatoes turning yellow and dying? Tomatoes can be finicky and there could be a lot of reasons for the turning yellow. One is that it could have been it was also very hot this weekend. And so even though they like the heat, being transplanted on a really hot day can be traumatizing for them. And so when I transplant, and also when I water, it's better to do it in the cooler parts of the day. So early morning or late in the evening, after the sun has gone down and the air is cooled a bit. If you plant in the direct sun at noon, it's just very, I don't like being in the direct sun at noon, and neither do the tomatoes. Also planting, and you can do watering in the morning or in the evening. So I would check in the early morning and see how your plants are doing and water them, especially on hot days like this. And then also check again in the evening and water them like towards the evening if the soil seems dry. And on 90-degree days like we've been having, I would definitely check them twice a day. If it's cooler, like in the 70s or so, probably once a day is fine, and they should be good throughout the day. And then I would also say that I would avoid watering midday if you can. A lot of times plants will wilt in the early morning or in the midday heat, and it's just a way that they conserve energy and keep they've like kind of reached their solar capacity input level. And so wilting is a way for them to like no longer continue to be trying to absorb sunlight because they don't need as much. So if you see them wilting in the middle of the day, don't necessarily get worried because they usually perk up at night. If you check them at night and they're still really wilted, then there might be something else going on. It might be a watering issue. And then the yellowing can be also a watering issue. So sometimes the tomatoes will turn yellow if they are both being overwatered or underwatered. So it's an interesting balance because you just have to kind of determine, is it that I'm giving it too much water? How is the soil? Is it really saturated? Or is it just that it hasn't been getting enough water and it's starting to dry out? Overwatering, so Colorado is very hot. And so underwatering is an issue, but overwatering, because it's so hot, people often compensate by giving the plant more water than it needs. So both of them can be an issue out here. And again, they're susceptible to diseases. If they weren't fully hardened off before planting, the shock of transplanting could have caused damage, which would mean that the plants are turning yellow and dying. It could also, so those are, you could have some kind of disease depending, I don't know if it's a plant that you got from us or if it's from a plant store, but sometimes plants from plant stores and just greenhouses might have diseases already. Early blight is a common one that tomato plants can get.
We don't have much sun on our balcony. Is there anything that we can grow?
Yeah, so most vegetables need, again, about 6 hours of sun, but if you don't have a lot of sun, some things like a little bit more shade, like mint is a very popular shady one. It can tolerate a fair amount of shade. And then certain greens, they still need some amount of sunlight, but they can grow with less sunlight than plants like tomatoes or basil. So certain greens and herbs could do well if you've got at least some sunlight. 4 hours would be kind of the minimum, I would say, that you want of direct sunlight for some of the like greens like kale or chard or lettuces. But all of those things you could grow easily in a grow bag, and they would. Another thing you could do is if it is on a wheeled thing and the sun moves across your porch or your patio, you could just wheel it throughout the day, which might be a pain. I don't know how excited you are about doing that, but that is a possibility of just like moving them around. And could you grow edible flowers in the bag in the shade? You could grow some. I'm trying to think. I mean, the edible flowers that are popular to grow are nasturtium and calendula and borage are like the ones that I know most of. And flowers, like vegetables, tend to enjoy a fair amount of sun. So like 6+ hours of sun is really ideal for any kind of edible flower. I'm wondering, because nasturtium is kind of a more of a ground cover. I wonder if you could try nasturtium and see if it grows well in the shade, but I feel like things like calendula prefer a fair amount of full sun. The soil that we use for planters is just basic potting soil. So if you see anything that just is called potting soil, it'll probably be fine for bags. I'm just wondering what kind of chemicals or whatever, like what is in the Miracle-Gro soil. And just, I think a question I would have is just like, would it be too much if it just straight up soil in the bag? Sometimes when if it's for in-ground use, maybe it's intended to be mixed with whatever soil is already there. And so that putting it directly in your bag might be too high a concentration of whatever inorganic amendments they're using in the soil. And anyway, any basic potting soil would work for a planter. If you have extra Miracle-Gro soil, you could try mixing it with some basic, like with another potting soil. And then I'd also just see if, what's in it and what the bag says about using it. Yes, the bag that we gave is intended to be planted. If you're planting your tomato and your basil in it, then you can use all of the soil in the bag. And I would say, yeah, all of the soil in the bag is fine. You don't want too much less than that. You want the soil, you want a fair amount. I think right now this bag has probably, what is that, like 7 or 8 to 12 inches of soil, depending on how full your bag was. And again, with tomatoes, they like deep roots. So I wouldn't put in any less, and I wouldn't take any out. You don't want the soil flowing out of your bag. So you want, but in a container, something between 1 or 2 inches from the top is a good amount. And you can definitely plant in it and use it all. And a lot of plants, like especially with the herbs, if you're keeping them in the bag, they have some more room to grow. That's nice.